And hello and welcome everyone. This is Lloyd de Jong again. Today I'm going to be doing part 2 of Hitler versus Christianity. We're discussing the historical data versus the typical atheist and Muslim propaganda. And in fact, as I'm very upset to learn also very much Protestant propaganda against the Catholic Church and against Pope Pius XII, who was the Pope during World War II. So yesterday I did a section where I discussed specifically the reputation of Pope Pius XII and historical records that exonerate him, that prove that the claims that he was apathetic about what was happening to the Jews, that he did nothing, that those claims are actually false. There's a huge, overwhelming amount of information. I could do several hours of material on that topic alone. So I did a separate show on that last night. Just to introduce that, today I'm going to do a little bit of that, not exactly the same material, some of the same, some new material. Please look at the previous show yesterday to learn more, and then I will continue with what the Nazis and what Hitler thought of Christianity. Of course, their extremely negative opinion of Christianity. Right, so we have Horse, hello and welcome. We have Marlene Stewart, very welcome. Joel Thomas, RJ, Kush XD, Sandro, Eva, welcome everyone, good to see you all. Let's go. Yeah, also, I was in an episode together with Sam this week. So my evening with Sam is Thursdays. Sam usually travels somewhere to some conference other on Fridays, and then he cancels on Thursdays because he needs to prepare for his departure on Friday morning. So we agreed to Wednesday. Then he canceled Wednesday, and now he's asked me for tomorrow. But tomorrow I would, it's going to be earlier than usual because, so yeah, I might want to ask Sam to shift it to a different time, a different day rather, because constantly getting cancelled on, or moved is a little, it's a bit frustrating. You very much enjoyed hearing about Pius XII. Thank you, Horse. Yeah, I mean, I've heard Hitler's Pope, all of that, and I've discovered that story is completely false. The evidence clearly lands in the other direction. And the whole negative impression of him was created in the 1960s. He was viewed as a hero prior to 1963. It's insane how the story has changed and morphed. I've looked at both sides of it. I've looked at the negative comments made, and oh my gosh, one, it's easy to disprove those, and two, people just seem to like the lies. Arnold Nathaniel, very welcome. Good to see you all. So for those who subscribe to the channel, remember always, if you want to get hold of me, if you want to have a chat, just reach out. I'm available. I'll have to schedule some time. If you want to set up a group chat, I'm happy to do that. I will give priority to people who are members and donors, so please do that. I do speak often to people. I do, as I have time, make it available to speak to anyone. So if you have questions, I'm there. Mystery Sniper, different time zones suck and schedules always get in the way, but yeah, it does. Look, as you know, Sam has two reputations, and I don't think this is a mystery to him. One, he's an absolute genius when it comes to the biblical text on the Quran, and two, he's got a not so positive reputation, and I don't think I have to say too much about that. He knows it. We all know it. So, yeah. Okay, let me see. Host, the modernist took over. Yes, Michael van der Vlies, hello and welcome. I've seen the documentary on History Channel called Hitler's Secret Sex Life and What Do You Think About It? I don't know about it. I actually have a job now, and I was unemployed for a long time. Being in Poland. So yeah, now I have a full-time job, so time is different, and I have to try and have a life too. So welcome, 1278. Do you get any material on Islamic lobby inside the West? I did reply to you yesterday. I have an entire two-part series on that called The Arab Lobby. Looked it up, search on my channel, The Arab Lobby. I have a two-part series on that, the entire financial corruption of Western academia by Arab oil money. Everyone says it's the Jews. To be quite blunt, the Muslims have poured at least 60 times more money into academia than the Jews could even afford. At minimum, it's billions of dollars. And very simply put, I mean, the Arabs are floating on oil. They can afford to pump, metaphorically, so much money into academia to corrupt it, to even into schools, into kindergarten. They've gone all the way. So yes, I have an entire series on that, and please take the time to check the channel. Take the time to look. Okay, great. Welcome, Rachel Zetsevich. I hope that's correct. Maar de zee is nog koud. Ja, dat is een beetje koud hier, Michiel. Ja, nee. Dus, Dis 'n mooi dag, maar dis 'n bietjie van 'n koue dag. You know Sam in person, Sandro. Yeah. Well, look, Sam is, Sam is Sam. So it's just, okay. Yeah, let's stay on topic. So guys, let me jump into this topic. So first I am going to go here. Some new material versus what I covered yesterday. Thank you very much, Rachel. Marlene, Mr. Ivorish, let's see Yakov. Always good to see you, Mystery Sniper. Yes, YouTube is buffering me. Sorry about that, guys. I have done what I can to delay the stream. But the richest family in the world is Arab. Exactly. So yeah, the Arab lobby. When people talk about the Jews and their money, good grief, the Arabs just overwhelm them with money, and they work as a lobby. So, right, couple of things. So this is in response to claims that Pope Pius XII of the Catholic Church collaborated with the Jews. He was hand in hand with Hitler. You know, they were lovers secretly in bed, blah, 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 metaphorically speaking, right? So the Pope's Jews, the Vatican's secret plan to save Jews from the Nazis. Now, the revelatory account of how the Vatican saved thousands of Jews during World War II shows why history must exonerate Hitler's Pope. Accused of being silent during the Holocaust, Pope Pius XII and the Vatican of World War II are now exonerated in Gordon Thomas's newest investigative work. Gordon Thomas, as you know, is a rabid Catholic. No, actually, he's a Protestant. The Vatican gave him full access to the archives, and he came away with a completely different view. Right? He first refused when he was offered the opportunity to investigate this, but then he was doing research on a different book, came across a letter by the first president of Israel, right, over the first prime minister of Israel, which praised Pope Pius. And he said, hold on, wait, what I was told was true. And then he started to do the research. He was invited by the Vatican to do the research and completely changed his mind. So, the Pope's Jews. Thomas's careful research into new first-hand accounts reveal an underground network of priests, nuns, and citizens that risked their lives daily to protect Roman Jews. I will ask a question. What were the atheists doing at that time? Investigating assassination plots. They wanted to kill the Pope. Conspiracies. They wanted to kidnap the Pope. And secret conversions. Thomas unveils faked documentation, quarantines, and more extraordinary actions taken by the Catholics and the Vatican. The Pope's Jews finally answers the great moral question of the war. Why did Pope Pius refuse to condemn the genocide of Europe's Jews? Simple. We discussed yesterday. If he had said anything out of line, people died. There were retaliatory murders by the Nazis. This happened several times, and the Pope had to learn to just don't say anything, zip it up, silently, secretly do what you need to do. In America, they spoke up. In Holland, they spoke out. People died. People were rounded up and killed for speaking up. All right, moving on. So there's some very interesting, the reviews are always something very interesting to read. You can learn a great deal from that. So, author uncovers evidence on Pius XII's wartime efforts to save Jewish refugees. Pius XII has been vilified as Hitler's Pope, accused of failing publicly to condemn the genocide of Europe's Jews. A British author has unearthed extensive material that Vatican insiders believe will restore his reputation. Gordon Thomas, a Protestant, was given access to previously unpublished Vatican documents. He tracked down victims, priests, and others who had not told their stories. It details how Pius gave his blessing to the establishment of safe houses in the Vatican and Europe's convents and monasteries. He oversaw a secret operation with code names and fake documents for priests who risked their lives to shelter Jews, some of whhom were even made Vatican subjects. They were employed at the Vatican. Priests were instructed to, to issue baptism certificates to hundreds of Jews hidden in Genoa, Rome, and elsewhere in Italy. More than 2,000 Jews in Hungary were given fabricated Vatican documents identifying them as Catholics. A network, a secret network, saved German Jews by bringing them to Rome. A priest was given money to provide food, clothing, and medicine. More than 4,000 Jews were hidden in convents and monasteries. His image turned sour in the 1960s thanks to a Soviet propaganda campaign, Soviet antagonism towards the Vatican, and a German play written by someone who had been in the Hitler Youth who was working as a communist agent called the Deputy. So it was a trend that intensified with the publication of Hitler's Pope by John Cornfed. Cornfed is what we say about beef and cattle. So, right. So with Professor Richlak, the author of Hitler, the War and the Pope, he said, Gordon Thomas has found primary sources. He has tracked down family members, original documents, and established what really the universal perception prior to the 1960s was. There's even a movie about Hugh O'Flaherty, an Irish priest. Everyone has always praised him because he helped Jews and escaped prisoners of war. They made a movie about him, The Scarlet and Black, with Gregory Peck. They always said he was acting on his own. His family said no, he was acting with the assistance of the Pope. Okay, let me just catch up with the comments. Atheists were rationally defending the Jews against the Nazis with rational arguments and very rational conversations. You're right. Actually, if you look at the Enlightenment thinkers, they hated the Jews. Good grief. French Enlightenment thinkers. Okay, let me see. Many Christians acted as real Christians and saved many Jews. Yes. To be honest, the first two protested against Germans in Holland during World War II were actually the communists. Well, don't forget, the socialists were socialist, and of course the Nazis were socialists. They were just enemy socialists, right? And sure, and the Nazis hated them as well. So yeah, we'll look at that. But there's right. The book also, besides, if the socialists had taken power, how would things have looked? Any better than Stalin's gulags? The book tells the story of Vittorio Sacerdoti, a young Jewish doctor who was able to work in a Vatican hospital. They invented fictitious deadly diseases that deterred the Germans from entering the hospitals. Dozens of fake patients were taught to cough convincingly. Thomas interviewed his cousin and recalled that as a child she was one of the patients. There was nothing wrong with her, but she had to cough regularly in the ward. Understand, they invented all sorts of wonderful reasons, made fake papers, and one more that I will give you. Heroes, Spies, Nazis, and the Pope. A true story that reads like a spy novel. The Pope called Hitler a false prophet of Lucifer. This was in an open letter to the Bishop of Cologne, Germany in 1935. His constant denunciations of the increasingly repressive and brutal German government led Hitler to brand the cardinal as a Jew lover in the Vatican. Now again, there is so much to be said. I could do hours on this, right? So Thomas again explains he's not a Catholic himself. He was researching a different book and came across a 1943 letter to Pope Pius by Chaim Weizmann, who would later become the first president of Israel. The letter thanked the Holy See, right, for everything he had done to help the Jewish people. Right, now to the presentation. So I have seen in various YouTube comments, Protestants obviously saying that, this guy's just lying, and then it's like, yeah, the usual condemnations. No amount of evidence will convince them. So you are not going to be convincing them with argument. You need to destroy them. You need to undermine them, humiliate them, embarrass them. But they are not going to voluntarily relinquish this argument. They have been destructive. They've been toxic. They've been corrosive. You can no longer try to practice tolerance. That is simply a way to lose. All right, so let me just continue here. Give me one moment. I love YouTube. Okay, it's CMB. Wow, thank you very much. I'm very grateful, CMB. Thank you. I just saw the super chat. If you have any questions, please ask. Again, if you want to get a hold of me privately and talk, I will try and make time. Yeah, so is there a genuine argument for Jews controlling the world other than the fact that Rothschild has a lot of money? Actually, look, please let's stay on topic if you don't mind. But when you look at the amount of money, the Rothschilds were rich in the 1700s. Since then, in those hundreds of years since then, he had many children and grandchildren. That fortune was distributed amongst those kids. The wealthiest Rothschild on the list of the Fortune 1000 richest people in the world, the Rothschilds don't even make it onto the list. You are being gullible. You are believing information that is nearly 300 years old. Do you understand? Right? The richest Rothschild is nowhere near. I mean, according to the richest people in the world, they're on the bottom. You are listening to propaganda that is way out of date, hundreds of years out of date. So, no, I don't think there's a genuine argument. I know what the argument is against the Jews. If you really want to have a genuine, rational discussion, I think I know what those arguments are. I know what the argument to be made is. And I can tell you that I'm the only one that I know of that would discuss that. Everyone, well, there's with one small exception perhaps. Everyone else is just lying flat out. Tell them I said that. Tell them I called them liars, please. Right. Again, just look at my story, The Arab Lobby. I go through all of this in great detail. Right. So they're acting like Muslims, don't believe in the facts. Yes, this is Protestants acting like Muslims. They're Abdul Protestants. I'm sorry, but that is just how it is. It's just a fact, and I'm ashamed of that. I'm really annoyed by that. Yeah, thank you again. Another donation. I don't know, I noticed the chatbot mentioned. Thank you again. Okay, so the mainstream theory, the truth is that Rothschilds are working under the Pope, is working under the Black Pope, is working under, yeah, who's working for the aliens, I know. Okay, back to the story. Now, we ended previously on this slide on Sunday or Monday. So Hitler was the new Messiah, right? The whole aim of the Nazi Party was to create positive Christianity, a new version of Christianity, just like so many people before, who invented their own heretical form of Christianity. Don't forget, this was anti-Catholic, it was even anti-Protestant. However, they had a large number of Protestant theologians who worked for them, who were developing a new Bible, a New Testament. Right. Also, they were going to replace the Bible with Mein Kampf. The swastika was going to replace the cross. Right. Slandering the Pope. So let's go through this again. Right. The Pope versus Hitler and the communists versus the Pope. So I'm going to just run through this again. Yesterday, I covered this in depth. Albert Einstein had high praise for the Catholic authorities. In Time magazine, December 23, 1940, he says, "The best tribute to the spirit of Germany's Christians comes from a Jew and an agnostic, the world's most famous scientist, Albert Einstein." So that's the journalist writing in this book. He said, "Only the church stood squarely across the path of Hitler's campaign. I am forced to confess that what I once despised, I now praise unreservedly." Pope Pius described Hitler as the false prophet of Lucifer in a 1935 open letter. Pacelli condemned the Nazis and anti-Semitism in 40 of 44 speeches he gave while serving as the Cardinal Secretary of the State of the Holy See. Chaim Weizmann, Israel's first president, highly praises Pius. "The Holy See is lending its powerful help wherever it can to mitigate the fate of my persecuted co-religionists." Moshe Sharet, Israel's second prime minister, met with Pius in the closing days of the war and told him that my first duty was to thank him, and through him the Catholic Church, on behalf of the Jewish public, for all they had done in the various countries to rescue Jews. So this idea of the Pope being anti-Jew, collaborating with Hitler, this cannot be supported by the evidence. It genuinely cannot be supported by the evidence. With brennende Sorge, right, this was with burning concern, with burning anxiety, a papal encyclical which he wrote, and this was sent to Germany, which led to repercussions and thousands of arrests and deaths. Normally written in Latin, it was written in German. He urged the faithful to show heroism and not to associate with the Nazi cause, to separate themselves, right? So Hitler was infuriated about this. It caused intensified Nazi persecution of the Catholic Church in Germany. 12 printing presses were seized, hundreds of people were sent to prison or the concentration camps, and over the ensuing years, thousands of people. In his diary, Goebbels wrote that there were heightened verbal attacks on the clergy from Hitler, and they started trumped-up immorality trials against clergy, and the anti-church propaganda campaign began. Goebbels' orchestrated attack included a staged morality trial of 37 Franciscans. On the church question, wrote Goebbels, "After the war, it must be solved. There is an insoluble opposition between the Christians and a heroic German worldview." What they mean by a heroic German worldview is that in the Hegelian, which is, of course, Hegel was the modern philosopher that most influenced Marx, besides the French Enlightenment philosopher that influenced Marx, Rousseau. But the Hegelian heroic man stood above conventional morality. He was not subject to standard morality. He was not subject to God. He was not subject to the Bible, to church doctrine. He could do as he pleased. "Do what thou wilt" is the whole of the law, the satanic creed. These are Catholic priests being freed from Dachau. William Shirer says the Concordat was hardly put to paper before it was being broken by the Nazi government. The Nazis promulgated their sterilization law, an offensive policy in the eyes of the Catholic Church. 5 days later, they moved to dissolve the Catholic Youth League. Clergy, nuns, and lay leaders were targeted, leading to thousands of arrests. In the face of this persecution, Pope Pius issued his Mit brennender Sorge encyclical. It denounced the pagan ideology of Nazism. In response, hundreds more clergy were arrested and sent to concentration camps. Do you see why the Pope had to be very careful what he said? The Pope is not a general. He does not have an army. I know people would like to think the Pope has his own assassination squad called the Jesuits, but yeah, that's basically that would be French Enlightenment thinker propaganda. So, which was then taken up by the Soviets and, of course, Martin Luther too. Catholic schools, press, trade unions, political parties, and youth leagues were eradicated. Prominent Catholic lay leaders were murdered, and thousands of Catholic activists were arrested. An estimated 1/3 of German priests faced some form of reprisal in Nazi Germany, and 400 German priests were sent to the dedicated priest barracks of Dachau concentration camp. Of 2,700 clergy imprisoned at Dachau and occupied territories, 2,579, or 95%, were Catholic. All right, let me continue. I believe there was another donation, and thank you very much for those. I do appreciate that. Okay, let me continue. Polish prisoners in Dachau toast their liberation from the camp. Poles constitute the largest ethnic group in the camp and the largest proportion of those imprisoned in the priest barracks of Dachau. Now, I live in Poland. I live in Warsaw. I've traveled extensively through Poland, and there are several old concentration camps, smaller prisons in Warsaw itself, and I've been to one. It was a emotionally horrific experience. When I listen to people say that not a single Jew died in any of the concentration camps, the Poles lost 20% of their population. Someone was dying. And you do not see like lengthy speeches about Hitler hating the Poles. He wanted to wipe out the Slavs. He wanted to wipe out the Poles. Now, if you didn't hear him at all speak about the Poles and he wiped out 20% of them, he spoke endlessly, non-stop about the Jews. Do you think he didn't kill one of them? Honestly? Right. The case against the Nazis are Hitler's forces planned to destroy German Christianity. New York Times, leftist publication. According to Baldur von Schirach, the Nazi leader of the German Hitler Youth, the destruction of Christianity was explicitly recognized as a purpose of the National Socialist movement. From the beginning, although considerations of expedience made it impossible to adopt this radical stance officially until it had consolidated power. This is exactly like Islam. Once you are on top, do not show weakness. Feign weakness and cooperation until you seize power. This, of course, I've mentioned before. There's another one. I actually found another one of these maps, and I found a great deal of evidence. There's actually piles of it. It's amazing how much there actually is that I've never heard of before. But notice here, these are Protestants who voted for Hitler. All the black areas, Nazi votes, Protestant votes. Look at these areas here, okay? The percentage of Catholics in Germany. Notice the white areas. These are Catholic areas. They did not vote for Hitler. There was Protestant support for Hitler. The Catholics were very much anti the Nazis and did not vote for him. Michiel van der Vlis, yeah. It's difficult. I mean, to be in that environment, you feel something, man. It was, I was rubbed raw emotionally. I had to go take a walk. It was crazy wow. Those ridiculous conspiracy theories that the Holocaust never took place. I mean, you speak to the Poles. I mean, everyone has lost family. Everybody, right? Everybody has lost family. It's just crazy. Everyone claims they collaborated. Now, this is one book. There are others that are probably even better, but this is an interesting book, one of the first on this topic, where the Vatican opened their archives and people were starting to see what really happened. Okay? The Nazis disregarded the Pope. The Nazis disregarded his warnings. Right? But the historical narrative that is presented is slander. It is smear. It is not fact. So, let me see. So, what did Sister in Christ say? I missed whatever she said. Let me continue, though. So, Jewish Rabbi David G. Dalen's book debunks the myth that Pope Pius was in league with Hitler. The Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, a Muslim, was in league with him, became a general, volunteered as a general in the Nazi army, raised a large number of troops for Hitler, and of course the SS, the largest division in the SS was the Muslim division, 30,000 soldiers, called the Hancha. So, when Pope Pius XII worked to save Jews from the Nazis, the Grand Mufti was calling for the extermination of Jews. The book provides the true history of the Catholic Church's effort to save Jewish lives during the Holocaust, and the Nazi plan to kidnap the Pope. They were going to assassinate the Pope, kidnap the Pope. They were going to move the Vatican to Liechtenstein. They were going to take over the Vatican and have a state-approved Pope who with state-approved talking points. Understand, the Nazis were not happy that he wasn't listening to their playbook. He exposes the agenda of the mythmakers who used the Holocaust to attack the papacy. And what's interesting, in Hitler's Pope, right, the book by Kornfeld, he essentially uses it to attack and undermine Christianity at the end of the day, well, especially Catholicism, because he actually also attacks the Pope at the time, Pope John Paul II. Right, the Pope, he says, deserves to be called a righteous Gentile for his efforts to save the Jews. During the Pope Pius XII's lifetime, and immediately after his death, secular publications like the New York Times, Jewish groups and luminaries from Golden Meir to Albert Einstein and the Nazis themselves all assessed Pius as an enemy of Nazism and a friend to the Jews. Right? The Pope created networks in the church that became an underground railroad for saving lives of Jews and other persecuted people. The book explains the situations of the time in which Pope Pius had to act. Arnold Nathaniel says one of the first things that General Eisenhower did on seeing the concentration camps was to call in the press to document the genocide so that no one can deny that it actually happened. I know, he said, bring in the films, bring in the photographers, bring in the cameras, because no one will believe that this happened. Well, you know what happens? You know what happened? When people see people filming, then I hear people saying, and I've seen this so often, man, they like, see, the whole thing was staged, it was a movie. Look, there's guys with cameras filming it. They're directing these actors to act. Do you understand that they will find a problem for every solution? They will constantly find ways to criticize and to undermine the truth. You are not working with people operating in good faith. I do not believe that these people are operating in good faith. I have not seen evidence of that. So my intention is not to have a good faith dialogue. These people need to be confronted. Their lies need to be confronted. Their propaganda needs to be confronted. Whether they are lying knowingly or not, they are destructive and they are toxic and they need to be moved off the board. Simple. Right? They're a piece you remove from the board. You nullify them, you take them off the board so that they are no longer effective. You just keep doing that one by one. So the Pope worked behind the scenes. He measured his every word and act against Nazi retaliation. Right? There are numerous examples where popes have excommunicated people, where popes have acted against people, and he says here, historic examples, and those actions backfiring. All right, now, of course, another guy that hated Jews and got many, many, many Jews killed is this guy. Martin, his name is Martin Hitler, Martin Luther. He invented Christianity in the 1500s, right? This guy, Martin Luther. And yeah, every anti-Jewish book printed in Hitler's Third Reich contained references to and quotations from Martin Luther. You need to read what Martin Luther wrote. Now, I know, I published on my community page where Martin Luther said that the book of James had to be thrown out. It needed, because he said, some Jew, he quotes, some Jew wrote James. Not James had written, some Jew wrote it, and it is a fraudulent book. Okay? Some Jew wrote a fraudulent text that's been included simply because it contradicted him. In fact, what people don't realize is Martin Luther had hundreds, thousands perhaps, of handwritten notes in the margins of all of his books. And he says of James, that is false. He flat out says that James is wrong. And of course, now I get people giving me, well, you know, what Luther actually meant to say, which is identical to people saying, well, you know, what Muhammad meant to say. Sorry, you're an Abdul Protestant. That's all I'm hearing. Hitler's words don't have to be interpreted by his apologists. Muhammad's words mean what they say. They don't have to be interpreted by his apologists. And Martin Luther's plain words do not need interpretation. Don't lie to me. Conociendo el Islam. Thank you very much. I'm very grateful again. Muchas gracias por la información. Thank you so much, sir. You're very welcome. Thank you. So, Luther movie 2004 shows Luther as an angel of God. The man was a vile pig. I'm sorry, seriously. If I'm going to annoy people, I do. If I'm going to offend people, that's it. I'm not deliberately setting out necessarily to offend people, but it's the truth. The man disgusts me. What I've read of him, what I've seen into his mind, it is disturbing. It is disturbing to know what he thought and how people defend him, how they will make excuses for no matter what he said and did. The man had a dirty mind, a foul, foul mind. Right, so let me see. Let's see, so hold on, what was anything that was said? Holocaust deniers are the same, okay. Let me continue. As they're saying, Christian Prince, it doesn't say that. Abduls and Luther's, yeah, they have to, yeah, exactly. Right, slandering the Pope. Now, the myth of being Hitler's Pope was, this is the guy who successfully managed, ultimately as the front man, to slander the image of Pope Pius. Hitler's Pope started with a play, right? The myth of being Hitler's Pope started with a play by a former Hitler youth, written in 1963, called The Deputy. Vilification began as easily dismissed communist agitprop against the strongly anti-communist pontiff. The campaign became a major issue with the Berlin premiere of the play written by Rolf Hochhuth. The man, yes, Joel Thomas, Martin Luther was obsessed with feces. It's called coprophilia. And what's weird is now, not to offend people, but the current Pope has said a couple of things that were just like, huh? What? Now, I'm not saying the Pope has made a career out of talking about feces and farts the way that Martin Luther did, because Martin Luther was just overjoyed to talk about poop. But yeah, the Pope has said things that are just like, and I mean, yeah, there's something wrong with the current Pope. But Hochhuth drew on... Okay, so this guy Hochhuth this playwright drew on communist propaganda. He plagiarized, he utilized long sections of fiction from communist works, right? So he used this to accuse the Pope of silence and inaction in helping Jews. This started the decline in Pius's reputation. So he utilized sources that were known communist sources. Hochhuth vilified Eugenio Pacelli, Pope Pius XII in 1939. Right? He became Pope in 1939 as a Nazi collaborator, an icy and avaricious pontiff, guilty of moral cowardice and inexcusable silence as Europe's Jews were murdered by the Nazis. The Pope had to keep silent. If he'd spoken up, he would have been killed, perhaps. People died because he spoke up. He realized, keep your mouth shut, work behind the scenes, work silently. See, no matter what he did, if he'd spoken up, right, they would have found something else. He didn't speak about this. They would have found, no matter what you do, they're going to find a way to criticize you. It's that simple. Right, let's see. Let's continue. Promoted as the most controversial play of our time, The Deputy was fictional, highly polemical. It had a back section in the book. It had an appendix that claimed to be historical, that claimed to provide a true history of what happened. It was complete fiction. It offered no historical evidence. It became a sensation and ignited a firestorm of controversy in the media and among intellectuals. So far, guys, does what I'm saying sound credible? Does it sound, because I can go through hours and piles of paper on this. I've spent a lot of time now looking at this. Does this sound credible? Does this sound as if this is something that makes logical and coherent sense? That I'm not just being a propagandist for the other side? Because when I look at the evidence from the other side, clearly it ignores disconfirmatory evidence. And in fact, we can show that in many cases, the critics who wrote about the Pope, A, ignored evidence, B, quoted his worst critics and completely overlooked other people who had very positive things to say, like these people I've mentioned already, and C, they fraudulently manipulated data. They committed academic fraud. So I mean, when you look at this in total, it's like, no, these people are lying. Okay, so let me see. Protestants love communist propaganda. Yep, that's because, man, I've seen too many people just smearing everything Catholic. Cold War communists wanted to discredit the Vatican's moral authority with a disinformation campaign called Operation Seat 12 because he was an outspoken anti-communist. Ion Mihai Patsepa, Roman Secret Service general who defected, told this to the West. He's written more than one book on the topic, right? He is the highest ranking defector to the West from the Soviet Union, from the Cold War era, the highest ranking defector, right? Now, the plan was authorized by Nikita Khrushchev in 1960. A General Ivan Agayants, they posed as priests. They entered the Vatican. They were able to research through the archives. They stole documents. They were looking for incriminating evidence against the Pope. They found none. they still then created this plan to create a play. Media was used to smear the Pope, right? They crafted an outline and false research for the play The Deputy, and the playwright, the producer, Erwin Piscator, is a devout communist. Devout communist. He also tried to smear Winston Churchill. It should also be noted, they also staged the plan to smear Pope John Paul II. What happened was they wrote a fake diary, a complete diary. And the agent was to plant this diary in an apartment, which was to be found by the Polish police, which was then going to show evidence that the Pope had been having an affair when he was younger. That he had an affair with someone. And this was designed to smear his reputation. What happened was the agent apparently got drunk, got in a car crash on the way to the apartment, and got caught. So, yeah. And then because he was in trouble with the cops, he sang like a little songbird. Right? So, adding to the intrigue, declassified British intelligence speculates that Rolf Hochhuth, the supposed author of the play, might have been an intellectual agent working for the East Germans or the Soviets. Historians Michael Feldkamp and Michael Burley, whom I've quoted before on the French Revolution, supports Patsepa's account, asserting that the operation fit into a larger pattern of communist efforts to discredit the Catholic Church. Right? The American producer was a communist, and dated January 10, 1969, a declassified British memorandum says that he played a knowing role in spreading communist propaganda. Soviet attempts to smear Pius had actually commenced as soon as the Red Army crossed into Catholic Poland. The Soviets hired a militantly anti-religious propagandist called Mikhail Markovich Scheinman. Hochhuth's play drew heavily upon Scheinman's lies and falsehoods. Right. Hochhuth's soldiers, Soldaten, attempted to destroy the reputation of Sir Winston Churchill. Again, a heavily contrived history. He relied on David Irving, a well-known Holocaust denier, but also convicted of fraud, of fraudulently manipulating academic data, historical data. And they said that he was looking to appease Stalin and even killing the anti-communist General Sikorski, the exiled Polish leader. Sir Martin Gilbert is an outspoken Jewish defender of Pius XII, the highly acclaimed official biographer of Winston Churchill, widely acknowledged as one of the most distinguished and respected historians and biographers of our time, says Pope Pius XII was one of the first to publicly condemn Nazi atrocities via Vatican radio. He spoke out on behalf of Europe's Jews and recounts the achievements of the extraordinary Catholics who, under the leadership of Pius, rescued Jews at great danger to themselves throughout Europe. Now, the Pope himself gave his personal order on the eve of the German deportation of Jews from Rome to open the sanctuaries of the Vatican City to all Jews who could reach it. That's from Gilbert. Right. This, of course, I've mentioned this story. This is the Israeli Philharmonic Orchestra. On their first trip to Italy, they requested to play in honor of Pope Pius. Right? They wouldn't do that if they didn't revere the man. Right? So it's estimated he saved about 800,000 lives, Jewish lives alone, plus others. I mean, they rescued gypsies, they rescued, you name it, downed airmen, from the RAF and so on and so on. Right? So he's highly respected. He chose to avoid a public confrontation with the Hitler regime, counting instead on less obvious but practical activity. Right? It is entirely legitimate. So he says there is strong evidence to support the view that his public restraint and diplomatic caution saved lives. You don't give your plan away. You don't talk. You don't. In the face of Hitler, are you going to keep your mouth shut, or are you going to speak up and get shot and then you're dead and you can't do anything? So Martin says that not only did Pius speak out, but the Nazis accused him of being the mouthpiece of the Jewish war criminals. He points to the Pope personally saving 3/4 of Rome's Jews when the deportation started after the German occupation. Rabbi David Dalen, notes that Pius's first encyclical was against Nazi racism. The Allies dropped 88,000 copies over Germany. And the Jewish Telegraphic Agency mentions this Israeli orchestra. They requested that they could play to show gratitude because of all the people that he rescued from the Nazis and the fascists. Okay, final one here, and then I'll move back on to the Nazis and Hitler. Michael Tagliacozzo, Jewish scholar and foremost authority of the Roundup of Rome's Jews, strongly defends Pius XII. He says that Pius was instrumental in saving the lives of close to 5,000 Roman Jews who were sheltered within the Vatican and in various monasteries and convents in Rome. He has nothing but praise for Pius XII from studying the primary documents. He said, I have a folder on my table in Israel entitled Calumnies Against Pius XII, but my judgment cannot but be positive. He did very much to hide and save thousands of us. The Italian Holocaust archival documents clearly prove that Pius, his protests and actions were decisive in rescuing 80% of Rome's Jews. Final one. Richard Brightman, the only historian authorized to study classified American espionage files from World War II, noted that secret documents proved to the extent to which Hitler distrusted the Holy See because it hid Jews. Hopefully that last slide, I think, yeah, but hopefully this gives you a clear picture. I want to definitively debunk this whole story. It is done. There is no evidence that this man, he was operating under very difficult circumstances. Right, so Illuminati are blah. Okay, yes, they are. Okay, let me continue. Cornwell or corn-fed, as in beef, right? Hitler's Pope. This picture, there's another picture. This is the American cover of the book. The British cover of the book has a wider format, and there's another soldier standing here. These are Weimar Republic uniforms. These are not Nazi uniforms. The publishers here tried to claim, the author tried to claim that this was taken in 1939, that this was the Pope leaving Hitler's residence, going to congratulate Hitler on becoming Chancellor, whatever the case is. This picture was taken in 1927. They deliberately falsified this information to make it look as if he was hobnobbing with Hitler. So, let me just continue. Right, now the author of this, he's been all over the place, he keeps flip-flopping, but Cornwell stated that Pius XII had so little scope of action, it is impossible to judge the motives for his silence. We know why he was silent. It's not impossible to judge. He was corned beef. Exactly, sister in Christ. He was total corned beef. He stated in 2008 that Pope Pius XII's scope for action was severely limited. When Pius XII died in 1958, there were tributes from virtually every Jewish group around the world. And it says here he manipulated the photograph to claim that it came out in March 1939, the month that Pacelli was made Pope. It was taken in 1927 as he was leaving a reception held for German President Paul von Hindenburg at Paul von Hindenburg's birthday, if I recall. Understand, they will lie about anything and everything. Another author, Robert Royal, has also repeated this allegation, that the publishers and the author lied about this photo. So, back to Luther, Marcion, and the Protestants, right? We've spoken about this before, Harnack and Martin Luther. So, okay, Rosenberg. Alfred Rosenberg was the Nazi ideologist for Hitler. So he worked very closely with Hitler. He was he resurrected Gnosticism and incorporated into their religion. These Gnostics were heavily anti-Christian, anti the orthodoxy, of course, and he viewed history from a perspective called scientific racism. The Pope spoke out against scientific racism, right? Now, of course, there was a struggle between the Aryan race, this perfect Nazi race, and their supposed inferiors. The Jews were the lowest on that totem pole. They had condemned DNA, right? So they had to fight against Semitic influences from Europe by any means necessary, including killing their enemies, right? We've mentioned this before, so we've mentioned this as well. Meister Eckhart as an influence, of course. Now, he is compared with Plotinus and Porphyry. Porphyry hated Christians, hated Christianity. Plotinus created what I believe is the template for both Muhammad and for Allah. When you look at He's the One, and you look at what Porphyry wrote about Plotinus, that template can be ascribed to both Muhammad and to Allah. Can I do research on Calvin or other Protestants? Yeah, Calvin basically copied the Sharia. Calvin, as far as I can tell, from what I've read, Calvin basically, if you know the Quran, you're not going to see it. But once you know the Sharia, Calvin just basically copied the Sharia, pasted it in, and called it his theology. Yeah, it's kind of weird. So but that's the story for another day. Martin Luther, it's very tough. It's very slow going doing Martin Luther. Condemned DNA. Their DNA was dirty. Their DNA is, filthy. That was the story. They're corrupt. Their whole DNA is corrupt. They cannot be allowed to breed. Understand? That was the view of the Nazis. Scrunchy. Schopenhauer stated, Buddha, Eckhart, and I all teach essentially the same. And Eckhart was basically a heretic. He was incorporated into the Nazi ideology. And if Schopenhauer, who was a rabid anti-Christian atheist, said that Buddha, Eckhart, and himself taught the same, then this man was not a Christian. Right? So I've discussed some of this stuff before. Okay, he does mention in his writings that Pauline church is therefore not Christian. So Paul is not a Christian because Paul subverted Christianity, which is a Muslim claim dating back to the 8th century. Later, Paul completed the subversion of Christianity independently of Mark. So Mark also undermined and subversively altered Christianity, introduced false teachings, and therefore Christianity is false, and they are rescuing Christianity because the Nazis believed they were the true Christians. They believed they were Christian. Gnostics have silently, it's the silent religion, the hidden, the secret religion, right? So, of course, he claimed that there's no evidence that Jesus was a Jew, but I've done all of this, okay? All else is the magical production of the same Jewish, Middle Eastern, Babylonian theology that subverted Rome and controlled the Hebrew masses. We've discussed this before, right? So Rosenberg insisted there was not one shred of historical evidence that Jesus was Jewish or that his true message had come down to us today. Where have we heard that before? From the Muslims. Where were they getting this? Well, the Grand Mufti of Islam, right? Such was the Pauline falsification of the great figure of Christ. Right? Without Gnosticism, Metaphysical Joker says, there will not be even a so-called brain for Muslims. Guys, if you like this, please like, share, subscribe, tell people about it, share it, use it. Okay? By the way, there's something that I've been giving atheists some grief today, because on Testify's channel, I was posting, he posted something on atheism, and I've been asking the atheists this, and they really seem to dislike this. Secret religion, we have not heard, yeah, exactly, secret religion. Atheists call themselves scientific atheists. They follow scientific atheism. This is a Marxist-Leninist term. It was invented by Marx and Lenin, used by Marx, Lenin, and the Soviets, right? It's used by Mao. It's used by the worst totalitarian governments on earth, who are all atheist governments. Atheism is official under those governments. Atheists peddle Soviet anti-Christian propaganda. If you read Marx, Lenin, Stalin, and you read today's atheists, they say the same things. I asked them, how are you different to Marx, Lenin, and Stalin if you use the same title, you follow the same ideology, and you spread the same propaganda? I never get an answer. Odd. Lenin required that his sympathizers and followers spread the propaganda of atheism. That's a term he actually used. It was compulsory for communists to do so. Today's atheists espouse the same propaganda as the Soviets. How are these atheists any different? Right? Ask them these questions because that'll be interesting to get the answers. They really are embarrassed by their history. So, Mein Kampf was meant to be scripture. Rosenberg sympathized and identified with the Armenian genocide, right? He blamed the victims, right? And also, in his memoir, German chaplain Hans Leonhard, right, describes a visit to a military hospital in World War II. Says, so you're a pastor, one patient jeered. We don't need one of them. You just want to tell us those stories about cattle breeders and pimps. So Rosenberg created the idea that the Old Testament was just a story about cattle breeders and pimps. The phrase came from the Nazi ideologue Alfred Rosenberg in his book The Myth of the 20th Century. He dubbed the Old Testament a collection of stories of pimps and cattle traders. Members of the pro-Nazi German Christian movement popularized Rosenberg's phrase in church circles. Sadly, this is a Protestant German Christian church. Tell me just one such story, he said to the man. If you can tell me even one story, I'll leave the room immediately and never bother you again. And the guy said, I can't think of any right now, he finally said. Now, the others laughed at him, but he did not give up. You see, he doesn't have evidence, he can't prove his case, doesn't shut up. And he says also, a real man doesn't pray. You see, they were very much anti-Christian. This is what the soldiers were taught. Destination, thank you. I see we have a new subscriber. Thank you. All right, positive Christianity and jihadi Jesus. Positive Christianity, which was the version of Christianity the Nazis designed with a completely rewritten theology by these Protestant theologians that were sent positive to Nazi ideology, right, had tactical objectives different to Nicene Christianity. They selectively edited they eliminated the Old Testament and selectively rewrote the New Testament to reject impurities invented by the Jews that could corrupt the Christian faith from Jewish written parts of the Bible. Jesus' Aryanhood and non-Jewishness made him a Nordic Amorite. In the Reich Protestant churches, the New Testament was altered, and Jesus was reworked into a militaristic jihadi Jesus. He was a heroic figure fighting the Jews using Nazified language. Okay, so he had completely false ideas. We've covered this before, my apologies. So let me just skip ahead. Of course, Jesus is a Muslim, Jesus is a Mormon, Jesus is a Jehovah's Witness, anything but a Christian. I mean, anything but the founder of Christianity, right? Hitler's book, My Jihad. Hitler reassured his readers that both Christian denominations, Catholicism and Protestants, were valid bases for the German people. That's what he said when he didn't have the power, right? provided the churches did not intervene in state affairs. Once he got power, he went after the churches. It is documented that Hitler privately scorned Pauline Christianity to his friends, such as Martin Bormann. But when campaigning for power in Germany, he publicly made statements in favor of Christianity. The most persuasive explanation of these statements, wrote Lawrence Rees, is that Hitler, as a politician, simply recognized the practical reality of the world he inhabited. Had Hitler distanced himself or his movement too much from Christianity, it is all but impossible to see how he could have been successful in a free election. He would have been rejected. You saw that the majority vote would have been the Catholic vote, and of course, overwhelmingly then, the Protestants, right? The Catholics already did not vote for him. The Protestants voted for him. If he'd alienated them, he would have had no one voting for him. Thus, his relationship in public to Christianity was opportunistic. There is no evidence that Hitler, in his personal life, ever expressed any individual belief in the basic tenets of the Christian church. Ask anyone who claims he was a Christian, okay? Was he a practicing Christian? Where did he go to church? How often did he go to church? Right? Where does he write about his love for the church? His observance of sacraments of any kind, right? Baron Rudolf von Sabotendorf. Tea time with Hitler. This is Baron Rudolf von Sabotendorf, a German convert to Islam. He was adopted 3 times by he was adopted 3 times. 3 adoptions, great. At 33 years old, or 37 years old, he was adopted 3 times. Long story, I will cover him separately. This is him here. And of course, this is Hitler looking very small and nervous next to this man. You can see the crazy 1,000-yard stare here. Baron Rudolf von Sabotendorf was an advisor and friend to Hitler early on. So he died in 1945 or maybe 1955 or maybe 1947. I don't know, you tell me. He was a Sufi. He was a Muslim. He was a Freemason and a practitioner of alchemy. He moved to Turkey where he met the Jewish Termudi family. When they say Jewish Termudi, these are, who introduced him to Rosicrucianism and led to his initiation into a local Masonic lodge. In 1910, he founded a lodge of the Bektashi order, Sufi lodge, Muslim, in Constantinople. Don't forget, Al-Azhar University, which pushes out the most well-trained imams in the world, has the 4 schools of fiqh, which they teach at Al-Azhar in Cairo. They also happen to have the 7 tariqas of Sufism there. They also turn out Sufi sheikhs who are even higher in knowledge and higher in status than the regular imams. Returning to Germany in 1917, he founded the Thule Society, an occult organization that led to the German Workers' Party. So all the Nazis joined the Thule Society, this occult, Muslim occult organization, which was racist to the extreme. And then Hitler joins it, and then the next it into the Nazi Party, racist party. Joined in 1919 by Adolf Hitler, who transformed it into the Nazi Party. Sabotendorf left the Thule Society. And okay, I'm just quoting what I saw in the text here verbatim. Okay, as he became increasingly political, fleeing to Turkey, like he was a victim. We'll talk about that. This is his book, Secret Practices of the Sufi Freemasons, the Islamic Teachings at the Heart of Alchemy. And it reveals the secret spiritual exercises of the Bektashi order of the Sufis. It shows how this order, also known as Oriental Freemasonry, preserves the ancient spiritual doctrines forgotten by modern Freemasonry. So the Sufis claim to be the original Freemasons. They have the earliest Freemasonry, the true Freemasonry. Explains how to transform the soul into the alchemical magnum opus. So alchemy is a spiritual transformation. You transmute your soul into the perfected man, the insan al-qama. And you combine Masonic hand grips and the abbreviated letters of the Quran. The secret words, the secret letters in the Quran are used to make chants, to make these incantations that give you perfection. Right? It was published in Germany in 1924, and it reveals the secret spiritual exercises of the Bektashi order of Sufis. And this order, known as Oriental Freemasonry, preserves the ancient spiritual doctrines forgotten by modern Freemasonry. He explains how the mysterious abbreviated letters found in the Quran represent formulas for perfecting the spirit of the individual. You become just like Muhammad. You become perfected. Muhammad was the perfected man through these esoteric occult practices. This teaches you how to become like Muhammad and to merge with Allah. Understand? So this leads to how to ennoble the self and to lead to higher knowledge. It is Gnosticism. Yeah, Islam claims for itself all the best evil ideas. It even claims that Hermes Trismegistus, the pagan god Thoth, the Egyptian god Thoth, the Greek god Hermes, is basically the ancestor of Muhammad. All right, so let me just have a look. So guys, what are you learning so far? What have you learned? Does it all make sense? Was he influenced by René Guénon? I don't know. I've heard the name, but I don't know. I can't answer that right now. I need to look into that. The Übermensch, exactly. The perfect man, the Übermensch. Correct, Yaakov. That is true. So, the Rosicrucians, the Rosy Cross Society, were a German secret society and founded by Christian Rosenkranz. Yeah, sure. Rosenkreuz. Right? And the swastika was the Hakenkreuz. An alchemist who claimed to have gained his spiritual knowledge from travels in the Middle East, from Sufi sheikhs in Morocco. So that's where the Rosicrucians come from. This is the Rosicrucian symbol. Notice the stylized swastika with the sun. See? The stylized swastika with the sun. This is the Toolgesellschaft. Yeah, so this is related to the Rosicrucians. So you have the dagger, but notice also the crescent moon. See? The crescent moon. Here. So you've got the crescent moon. You've got this very Ottoman-looking pommel. Right? And you've got the Nazi swastika here. He returns to Germany with wealth inherited from his adoptive father and a vast knowledge of the East. He makes contact with leaders of various German occult and mystical groups. He becomes known by Rudolf Hess and Hermann Pohl of the Germanen Order, and he founded the journal Runen and the Münchner Beobachter. This latter journal, was eventually purchased by the Nazi Party, so he starts a newspaper that's bought by the Nazi Party. He founds an organization that's joined by Hitler, which becomes the Nazi Party, and it's renamed the Völkische Beobachter. Its editor was Alfred Rosenberg. Hey, we've got a connection here. This crazy guy with that other crazy guy, right? With Hitler in the same organization. Yeah, people seem to learn a lot of odd stuff after moving to Muslim nations. Right, Sabotendorf oversaw the founding of the Thule Society on August 17, 1918, and it became the cradle of the National Socialist Movement. In 1933, he took credit for inspiring Hitler's Mein Kampf in his book Before Hitler Came, and that's where Hitler got upset with him. And that's why he fled the country after going to prison. Nothing to do with Islam. Yes, Mystery Sniper. Yeah, we don't have the gnosis, guys. We don't. We've only got facts, and you know, facts don't care. Feelings don't care about your facts. Rosenberg. Alfred Rosenberg was the Führer's delegate for the entire intellectual and philosophical education and instruction for the National Socialist Party. This man was in Hitler's ear all the time. He was the proponent of positive Christianity. He planned the extermination of the foreign Christian faiths imported into Germany because they were going to make a new Christianity. He was going to replace the Bible with Mein Kampf and the Christian cross with the swastika. Jesus became an Aryan, and Christianity was a religion at war with Judaism. It's insane that it all ties back to Hermeticism. Yes, it does, Joel, it does. Islam does claim to originate in Hermeticism. In fact, the Abbasids claim that Hermes Trismegistus was the ancestor of Muhammad. So, apparently, I mean, yeah, crazy but true. Hitler's My Jihad. In Mein Kampf, Hitler expresses his negative views on Jesus and the Jewish people. He believes that the Jewish mentality is foreign to the true spirit of Christianity, and that Jesus himself drove the enemies of the human race out of the temple of God. He does not have the Christian Jesus in there. He said that Jews use religion to advance their commercial interests. Their existence is based on a permanent lie, and he said that Christianity is a permanent lie. I've discussed that already. He refers to the protocols of the elders of Zion as evidence of the Jewish people's mentality and methods of action. He believes that the Jewish people are physically and morally degenerate. Their DNA is corrupt. That's what he believes. He believes that the poisonous contamination of their blood can only be eliminated from the national body, right, by death. Maybe, he says, maybe we'll never get rid of it. But conversion was the worst thing that could happen, right? If they converted, their poisoned DNA would enter into everyone's bloodstreams. They would enter into society. He did not want that. He criticized the Catholics and the Protestants for not fighting the Jews instead of trying to destroy one another, right? Don't forget, Hitler was very fond of Martin Luther. Not the Pope, he was very fond of Martin Luther. If the Pope was so evil, why did Hitler love Martin Luther? He had a wonderful feeling in his heart for Martin Luther. Because Martin Luther hated Catholicism. Martin Luther instructed his followers to lie about the Catholic Church. This was an instruction that Martin Luther gave. He instructed lying. I know another guy called Muhammad who also instructed lying. And people say, well, Muhammad was a liar and therefore Muhammad is not a good man. Martin Luther was, excuse my French, Martin Luther was a fucking liar. And Protestants go, well, Lloyd, you've got to understand it in context, because what Luther meant was, and sure, he was a horrible, vile, disgusting, lying human being, but we've got to ignore that and look at his positives, sorry, no, I'm not buying that. He claims the Jews are the source of all social, political, and economic problems in Germany. Right? The Jewish people are a threat not only to the German race, but to the whole world. From 1933 to 1939, more than 400 decrees and regulations were passed that restricted all aspects of Jewish life, public and private. Now, this is Hitler's secretary. Right? This is Hitler's secretary. We're going to get to her now. So this is an eyewitness. She spent years with Hitler. Okay? And she wrote a book called He Was My Chief, or He Was My Boss. Okay? The Memoirs of Adolf Hitler's Secretary, Christa Schröder. Introduction by Roger Moorhouse. Christa. Let's see what Christa has to say. The churches join in committing the sin against the image of God. How small is the influence of the Christian faith? Right? So Hitler said in a speech that the Christians join in committing a sin because they believe in the Jews. You see, they believe what the Jews say. They believe the false Bible. And, the Christian church is weak. Right? And she says that Hitler's monologues were primarily about the problem, quote unquote, of Christianity. The problem, Christianity was a problem to Hitler. Okay? Hitler's secretary, Christa Schröder, found Hitler's religious comments very illuminating as he exposed the deception and hypocrisy of Christianity, because that's what Christians do. Christians go and say, Christianity is just hypocrisy and deception, because that's what true Christians do, right? Even though he tried to palm himself off as a Christian when it served his political purposes, none of Hitler's friends or comrades considered Hitler a Christian. No one in his circle considered him a Christian. Everyone who hates the Catholic Church says Hitler was a Catholic, but no one around Hitler makes the claim that Hitler was a Christian. Only malicious anti-Christians and anti-Catholics say that. So here's the thing. Protestants use Hitler to smear the Catholic Church. Muslims and atheists use Hitler to smear Christianity as a whole. Thanks, guys. You're really helping. All of Hitler's close associates agreed with Schröder, testifying that he was antagonistic towards Christianity. Let me just stop and check if there were any super chats. Because I don't want to miss any of those if anyone provided any of those comments. So no, I think I've caught everything. All right, let me go back to this. So Hitler would not allow interracial marriages. Now this is from Richard Weikart, well-known author on Hitler. Now, I have read through Weikart's work. I've listened to hours of his work. A couple of things he says, I can't verify them, so I have excluded. There's some things that he says that I cannot find evidence for the source. Maybe he's got a source I don't have, right? Maybe he knows something I don't. But where I cannot verify the source, where I cannot find an actual source that says what he says, I've left those out. Hitler would not allow interracial marriages and forced many husbands and wives of Jews in Germany to choose between divorce or concentration camps. Under apartheid, when I grew up under apartheid, this was bad, right? This was un-Christian. Here, somehow, Hitler doing the very same thing as the apartheid government did. This is Christian. Hitler was a good Christian. So Catholic. Sorry, the hypocrisy. Joel Thomas, yes, I saw that. Thanks to Duza. So there was a book called the Rassenpolitik, right, or Racial Policy. It was an SS, a Nazi SS booklet. He discussed the churches in a section on opponents of the Nazi regime. So it discusses the church in a section on enemies of the Nazi regime. How were the churches then friends? It claimed that the church teachings on human equality contradicted Nazi racial ideology. Don't forget, in Islam, the kafir is not equal to the Muslim. He's as low as 1/15th of the value of a Muslim. This is not equality. This is a Muslim idea spouted here by Hitler. Handbuch für die Schulungsarbeit in der HR, okay? Vom deutschen Volk und seinem Lebensraum, translated as the Nazi Primer, official handbook for the schooling of the Hitler youth, listed Christian churches as implacable opponents of Nazi racial ideology. This book's actually available. You can actually see it here on the right-hand side. This is actually the book here. Manny, XJW, thank you very much. Who was worse, Hitler or Momo? I'd say Momo has had a more lasting effect. Hitler just happened to industrialize Momo's ideas. But thank you very much, Manny. I appreciate that. Yeah, if you have any more questions, ask. I will do my best to try and answer. Right, so we should start wrapping up. St. Paul, Jews, and Moses. Positive Christianity described the Nazi version of Christianity, right? Christianity had to be stripped of its Jewish roots and made compatible with Nazi ideology. Martin Ackerman says many both serve the same master, and that is true. Yeah, I'd agree with that. And in fact, there's a very famous saying you've all heard, when you serve two masters, you have to lie to one, right? Ask yourself, which one are they lying to? The Nazis believed that Jesus was not Jewish, but Aryan, that he fought against Judaism, and that he wanted the Nazis to fight against Judaism. Hitler believed that Jesus had been fathered by a Roman soldier. Now here's the thing. People go, oh, the Jews say in the Talmud that Jesus' father was a Roman soldier, and the Jews are blaspheming Jesus. Oh my God, sis, poofy, ha, those horrible Jews, those blasphemers. Hitler says the same thing. Hitler was a Christian. He was a good Christian. Oh yeah. He said in his book that Jesus was fathered by a Roman soldier, and that's okay because he was a Christian. The Jews said, "Oh, those horrible Jews." Sorry, guys. There's a disconnect here. There's a contradiction here. The people who would say this are clearly uneducated, malicious, if not also downright stupid.